Some of the world's greatest monuments were designed never to be seen by human eyes. This is the legacy of the celestial architect, a mythical builder whose creations were meant only for the gods. We will uncover the secrets of this enigmatic figure and explore the profound principles behind his invisible buildings. By the end, you will see the ancient landscape in a completely new way. How did a single architect coordinate designs visible only from the clouds, and why would a culture invest in art for a divine audience alone? What does it mean to create something magnificent that you know you will never fully appreciate yourself? The legend begins not with a name, but with a purpose that defies ordinary ambition. Ancient scrolls and oral traditions, from the high deserts of one continent to the dense jungles of another, whisper of a singular figure. Some stories describe him as a demigod, a child of a star and the earth. Others insist he was a mortal king or a sage, granted a divine sight that allowed him to perceive the world as the gods themselves did. What unites these disparate accounts is the method of his craft. He did not sketch his plans on parchment or carve them into stone tablets. His canvas was the land itself, and his tools were the sun, the moon, and the stars. He would wait for specific celestial events, a solstice or a planetary alignment, and use those moments to map his designs directly onto the terrain. A river bend might become the curve of a glyph, a valley the line of a massive wall, a cluster of hills the points of a constellation. The result was a blueprint written in geography, a design that only made complete sense from a vantage point far above the ground. This was architecture as a form of communication, but not with us. These immense structures were intended as offerings to the sky, as messages of devotion, or even as landing beacons to guide divine chariots. The very idea redefines the purpose of building. It was an act of faith on a monumental scale, creating something magnificent with the full knowledge that its true form would remain a mystery to its creators. Why pour such effort into a masterpiece you can never see? The answer lies in a belief system where the approval of the gods, witnessed from the heavens, was the only reward that truly mattered. This first principle transformed the very ground into a celestial map. The architect's designs were not oriented toward earthly landmarks or magnetic north, as a conventional builder might do. Instead, his alignment was with the heavens themselves. Each structure was a mirror reflecting the patterns of constellations, the precise points of the solstices, and the wandering paths of planets. Imagine a vast, sprawling complex of earthworks and standing stones. From the ground, it would appear as a chaotic jumble, a series of disconnected mounds and pathways. But from the perspective of the sky, on one specific night of the year, that chaos resolves into perfect order. The line of the Milky Way might align perfectly with a central avenue, or the rising sun on the summer solstice could cast a shadow that completes the outline of a colossal animal. This was far more than symbolic decoration. It was a form of sympathetic magic, a belief that by creating a perfect replica of the heavens on earth, one could attract or channel the energies of those celestial bodies. The layout itself was a permanent prayer, a calendar etched into the soil that marked sacred times and communicated directly with deities thought to travel the starry roads. It suggests the ancients viewed the landscape not as a passive stage for human drama, but as an active participant in a grand cosmic conversation. The earth was a living parchment, and the architect was its scribe, writing messages meant for an audience in the stars. This language was not written in ink, but carved into the very skin of the planet. The second principle of the celestial architect was a form of communication beyond spoken word, a geoglyphic language composed of massive earthworks. These were not just simple circles or squares. They formed intricate symbols, sprawling animal figures, and complex abstract patterns, a syntax of spirals, lines, and figures that could only be comprehended from a divine perspective. A single line stretching for miles was not merely a line, it was a sentence. A vast spiral etched across a desert plateau was not just a shape, it was a paragraph telling an entire myth. This was a visual grammar designed for an audience looking down. A zigzag pattern might represent the crackle of lightning, a direct invocation to a storm god. A perfect circle intersecting with a triangle could tell the story of a creation myth, of the sky uniting with the earth. The scale of this language is almost impossible to grasp from our human vantage point. A person standing within one of these designs would not see a majestic bird or a coiled serpent. They would see only what appears to be a simple trench, an oddly shaped hill, or a path leading to nowhere. They would be walking across a single letter in a word they could not read, a word so large it encompassed their entire world. The true narrative, the epic poem written upon the land, remained invisible, a secret held between the earth and the sky. The land itself became a sacred text, a collection of myths, warnings, and invocations waiting for a reader with the correct vantage point. This transforms the purpose of these sites from mere monuments to active participants in a dialogue. They were not built to be visited but to be witnessed. The effort required to create such a text, moving tons of earth and stone according to a plan no one on the ground could verify, speaks to an unwavering faith. It was the ultimate act of devotion to write a message to the gods in a language only they could understand, using the world itself as the parchment. But the myth of the celestial architect finds its most stunning echo not in legend but in reality. Etched into the high desert plains of southern Peru, the Nazca lines are a testament to the very principles we have been exploring. These are not mere scratches on the earth, they are colossal geoglyphs, some stretching over 200 meters, forming the unmistakable shapes of a hummingbird, a spider with one leg elongated to an impossible length, and a curious, wide-eyed monkey. Standing on the ground, you would see none of this. You would stand at the edge of a shallow trench, a line of displaced stones that seems to wander aimlessly into the distance. The grand design is completely invisible, lost in the immense scale. It is only from the vantage point of a bird, or in our modern era, an airplane, that these individual lines coalesce into breathtaking, purposeful figures. The Nazca people, a sophisticated civilization that flourished 2,000 years ago, achieved what the myth attributes to a single divine architect. They possessed the astonishing technical skill to plot and execute these precise, sprawling designs across miles of rugged terrain, a feat of engineering and geometry that still inspires awe. More importantly, their culture clearly held a belief system that valued a perspective beyond human reach. They created this immense gallery of art for an audience that was not human. The purpose remains debated. Were these sacred pathways for ritual processions meant to be walked by priests who could feel the shape of the divine animal beneath their feet, even if they could not see it? Or were they offerings, messages to gods who dwelled in the sky, prayers for water or fertility drawn on such a scale that only the deities could appreciate their full beauty? The existence of the Nazca lines blurs the line between historical fact and mythological archetype. It forces us to ask a profound question. Could the widespread legend of a celestial architect be a cultural memory of such ancient practices? A myth that grew from the collective wonder of generations who knew of these immense earthworks, created by their ancestors for reasons that became mystical over time. The lines stand as a powerful, tangible example of a universal human impulse, the drive to create magnificent, enduring work meant for an audience we cannot see. This deliberate concealment leads us to the architect's third and perhaps most cunning principle, the illusion of impermanence. From the ground, his masterpieces were designed to fade back into the landscape. He did not use quarried marble or polished granite meant to defy the ages for human admiration. Instead, his materials were the land itself. Alignments of stones might look like a simple farmer's field wall. A carefully terraced hillside could be mistaken for ancient agricultural steppes. A pattern created by planting specific types of grass or trees would appear to a casual observer as nothing more than a natural grove. These choices ensured that over a single generation, or after a few seasons of rain and wind, the grand design would begin to blur. What was once a precise line would soften into a gentle ridge. A sharp corner would become a rounded mound. The structure would appear to decay, returning to nature, its secret geometry dissolving before the very eyes of the people who lived upon it. This was not a flaw, but the entire point. The architect built a filter for perception directly into his work. For the vast majority of people, the site held no special significance beyond the everyday. It was just part of the scenery, but for those who were initiated, for the priests or the seers who possessed the sacred knowledge, the fading was an illusion. They knew what to look for. They understood that the particular alignment of those seemingly random stones would catch the light of the winter solstice in a specific way. They knew that walking a certain path across that overgrown terrace would reveal a hidden alignment with a distant mountain peak. The true design was not gone, it was simply encoded, hidden in plain sight. This created a powerful hierarchy of knowledge. The ability to see the invisible structure was not a matter of better eyesight, but a sign of divine favor or rigorous spiritual training. It was a test. The divine was not meant to be obvious, it was meant to be earned. The world itself became a puzzle, and only those who had learned its language could read the messages written upon it. This principle transforms our understanding of these ancient sites. A visitor today might look at a weathered earthwork and see only a ruin, a shadow of its former self. But according to this myth, we are not seeing a decayed version of the truth. We are seeing exactly what the architect intended us to see from our limited perspective. The grandeur was always meant to be elusive. This speaks to a profound world view where truth is not a single, simple fact to be observed by all. Instead, it is layered like the rings of a tree. There is the surface truth of the everyday world, and then there are deeper, hidden truths that require a shift in perception to access. The architect's work was a physical manifestation of this belief. He created a reality that was literally different depending on your point of view, teaching that the most important realities are often the ones we cannot see from where we currently stand. It suggests that the sacred was not separate from the natural world, but woven into its very fabric, waiting to be discovered by those willing to learn how to look. This reliance on a divine perspective demanded tools that were equally supernatural. The legends tell us the architect never worked alone. His silent partners were the mythical beasts of the sky. A giant eagle with feathers like polished obsidian would soar to impossible heights, its vision so sharp it could discern the perfect alignment of a stone from the clouds. Its flight would trace the outline of a sprawling earthwork, and the architect standing below would receive its guidance through flashes of light reflected from its wings. In other tales, a celestial dragon, a creature of wind and starfire, would descend. The serpentine path of its body as it flew low over the land would become the exact curve needed for a sacred mound, its scales imprinting a shimmering blueprint onto the earth. These creatures were far more than simple beasts of burden. They were living, breathing surveying instruments, their very nature born of the sky and possessing an innate understanding of its vast geometry made them perfect collaborators. This partnership mythologizes a very real, practical problem. How does one person standing on the ground verify the accuracy of a design that spans miles? The legend solves this by introducing beings who could act as intermediaries, their supernatural senses bridging the gap between human limitation and divine perfection. The use of these creatures elevates the work from a feat of engineering to a grand collaboration between the earthly and the heavenly. It suggests that creating something meant for the gods required the assistance of beings who were themselves touched by the divine. The architect was not just moving earth, he was conducting a symphony of mythical forces, each creature contributing its unique gift to the monumental task. This transforms the challenge of large-scale construction into a miraculous event, where the very animals of legend became co-creators in a work of art meant for the heavens. This hidden network of power points to the architect's fourth and most intricate principle, a deep integration with the Earth's own unseen energies. The placement of his invisible structures was never a matter of simple geography or aesthetics. Legends insist his blueprints were carefully superimposed over a web of ley lines, those hypothetical channels of spiritual force said to crisscross the planet like arteries. These lines were believed to carry a vital energy, a life force that flowed through the hills, valleys, and plains. By aligning his celestial designs directly with these energetic currents, the architect was not just building on the land, he was plugging into its very power grid. A vast earthwork shaped like a star, for instance, would not be placed just anywhere. It would be positioned with pinpoint precision at the convergence of several major ley lines. This intersection, this node, would then become a spiritual amplifier, a place where the natural energy of the earth was magnified and focused by the celestial geometry of the structure above it. Think of it not as a building in the conventional sense, but as a spiritual power station. From the human perspective on the ground, this location might feel unusually peaceful or charged with a strange stillness, but the reason would remain a mystery. From the aerial, divine perspective, however, the entire system would become stunningly clear. The individual structures would connect via the ley lines, revealing a vast, luminous grid stretched across the continent. This was the hidden infrastructure of a world alive with power, a network completely invisible to anyone simply walking from one village to the next. This principle connects the myth of the celestial architect to esoteric traditions found across the globe, from the songlines of Aboriginal Australians to the dragon paths of Chinese feng shui. It reflects a universal intuition that the earth is not an inert rock, but a living, breathing entity with its own rhythms and energies. The architect in this view was not merely an artist or an engineer, he was a master geomancer. He understood how to harmonize the cosmic patterns of the sky with the terrestrial currents of the earth, creating a resonance between heaven and ground. His work was a form of acupuncture on a planetary scale, inserting precise architectural needles at key points to balance and enhance the flow of energy for the benefit of all creation, a benefit witnessed and appreciated by the gods who traveled those energetic pathways. Why would such a system need to be invisible from the ground? Perhaps because this raw power was not meant for casual use. By encoding it into the landscape, the architect ensured that only those with the knowledge to perceive the grid could potentially interact with its force, protecting it from misuse and preserving its sanctity for its intended celestial purpose. These divine tools were never meant for a common workshop. The legends describe a plow forged from a fallen star, its blade so immense it could carve riverbeds and shape entire valleys with a single pass. This was not a tool for farming but for geology. It symbolized the architect's authority to fundamentally reshape the landscape, to guide the raw, untamed power of the earth itself. With this celestial plow, he did not simply move soil, he inscribed intentions into the planet's crust, turning chaos into deliberate form. His second tool was a compass whose fixed point was the North Star itself. When he set its leg, the drawing arm would sweep across the horizon, scratching perfect circles and arcs into the earth that stretched for miles. This compass did not measure small distances, it charted harmony with the cosmos. Every curve it created was an echo of the orbital paths of planets and stars, a physical manifestation of celestial motion. Then there was the level, a mysterious device that did not use a bubble of air, but the unwavering line where the sky meets the sea. By aligning his foundations with this fundamental horizon, the architect ensured his creations were perfectly balanced with the very plane of existence. His structures were not just level with the ground, they were level with the world. These tools were extensions of a divine will, transforming the act of construction into a high form of ritual. Each cut of the plow was a sacred incision, each sweep of the compass a prayer for order, each check of the level a reaffirmation of balance. The construction site became a temple, and the work itself was a continuous ceremony meant to please the gods by replicating their perfect geometry down here on Earth. This symbolism answers a deep question about these myths. Why go to such lengths to describe the tools and not just the finished product? Because the process was as important as the result. The myth suggests that the value of these invisible buildings was not just in their existence, but in the sacred act of their making. The architect was performing a kind of magic, using these God-given instruments to weave threads of cosmic order into the tangled fabric of the natural world. He was not building against nature, but collaborating with it, using divine principles to guide its raw potential into harmonious, intentional shapes. This turns the entire landscape into a testament to an ongoing ritual, a perpetual offering that was never truly finished, because the act of creation itself was the highest form of worship. The most profound secrets of the architect's work were not meant to be seen every day. They revealed themselves only at the precise moment when the heavens and the earth entered into a sacred agreement. This is the fifth principle, the dimension of time itself. Some myths speak of entire cities that remain completely invisible for most of the year, their outlines hidden within the rolling hills. But on the dawn of the summer solstice, as the sun crests a specific mountain peak, its long, low rays rake across the landscape like a searchlight. For just a few minutes, the angled light casts shadows that are exactly the right length and direction to trace the hidden walls and towers, causing the phantom city to materialize in stark relief before fading away as the sun climbs higher. Other legends describe vast animal figures, dormant and unseen, that are awakened only by the full moon of the autumn equinox, their forms drawn in shimmering moonlight on dew-soaked grass. This temporal locking adds a breathtaking layer to the invisibility. The structure is not just hidden in space, it is hidden in time. It becomes less of a static building and more of a celestial event, a performance that occurs on a cosmic schedule. The monument does not simply exist, it happens. This transforms the landscape into a dynamic, interactive creation. It is a clock of monumental proportions, its hands made of sunlight and shadow, its face the entire horizon. For the people who knew the secret, the changing seasons were not just about planting and harvest, they were about anticipation. They knew that on a specific day, at a specific hour, the land itself would perform a miracle, offering a fleeting glimpse of the divine blueprint. This reinforced a profound connection between time, the cosmos, and the sacred. The grandest revelations were not constant, they were earned through patience and alignment. It taught that the gods did not reveal their truths on demand, but only when the conditions were perfectly harmonious. The architect designed his work to be a partner in this cosmic dance, a permanent fixture that only became active during moments of celestial significance, reminding everyone that the most important things in the universe are often transient, appearing only when the time is exactly right. This fascination with a hidden world is not unique to one culture or continent. Across the globe, from the vast deserts of Australia to the misty highlands of Scotland, myths echo with the very same idea. The Aboriginal people speak of the dream time, a sacred era when ancestral beings roamed the earth. These beings did not just walk upon the land, they created it through their epic journeys. As they moved, their actions formed rivers, mountains, and deserts, and the paths they walked became what are known as songlines. A songline is far more than a simple trail. It is a living map, a sequence of landmarks that holds an entire story, a chapter of creation itself. To follow a songline is to sing the song of the ancestral being, to navigate by reciting the story of the land into existence with every step. From the ground, one sees a series of natural features, a rock that looks like a kangaroo, a waterhole where a lizard rested. But from an aerial perspective, these points connect into a continuous narrative, a line of power and meaning inscribed across the continent. The land itself is a text, and the song is its key, revealing a design meant to be understood from a perspective beyond the human. Similarly, in Celtic mythology, the world is layered. The Shia, the people of the mounds, were said to build magnificent forts and crystal palaces. Yet these structures were concealed by powerful magic, appearing to mortal eyes as nothing more than grassy knolls or ancient, overgrown stone circles. A human might walk right through the heart of a bustling fairy city and perceive only empty fields. The true splendor was reserved for those with the second sight, or for the Shia themselves, who operated on a different plane of perception. These global parallels are too striking to ignore. They point to a universal human intuition, a shared sense that the world we see with our everyday eyes is not the whole story. There is another layer, a hidden architecture created by beings with a higher understanding. The celestial architect is not an isolated anomaly, but a powerful expression of this archetype. He represents our deep-seated belief that the true meaning of our world, its grand design and sacred purpose, might be written on a scale so vast that we can only catch fleeting glimpses of it from our limited vantage point. This collective mythology suggests we have always sensed that reality is more complex, more beautifully ordered, and more intentionally crafted than it appears. Yet this grand vision of a world perfectly aligned with the heavens was not without its challenges. The myth of the celestial architect, like any epic, includes those who sought to steal his glory. Stories whisper of powerful kings, drunk on their own earthly authority, who looked upon the hidden wonders and felt not awe but envy. They commanded their armies of laborers to replicate the designs, to carve their own names and likenesses into the earth on a colossal scale. These were not acts of devotion but monuments to vanity, attempts to force the gods to acknowledge human greatness. A sorcerer wielding dark magic might try to twist the principles of celestial alignment for his own gain, aiming to harness the power of the stars for personal power rather than cosmic harmony. But these imitations always inevitably failed. The results were never majestic. A king's giant earthwork, intended to be a perfect spiral, would warp into a lopsided, clumsy circle. The solstice sun, instead of highlighting its grand entrance, would cast a shadow that made the structure look broken and foolish. A sorcerer's attempt to channel a ley line would backfire spectacularly, causing the ground to sink or the stones to crack, creating not a place of power but a blighted, cursed hollow where nothing would grow. The myths describe these failed sites as places that felt deeply wrong, where the air grew heavy and animals refused to go. They became warnings etched into the landscape itself. This recurring theme serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the sin of hubris, It draws a clear line between creation for a higher purpose and creation for selfish ambition. The power to design for a divine audience was not a technical skill that could be learned or a magic that could be captured. It was a sacred gift, a form of grace that required humility. The true architect worked in harmony with the cosmos, his ego subordinate to the grand design. The rivals, in their arrogance, tried to impose their will upon the cosmos, to force the heavens to obey their commands. Their failure was not one of engineering but of spirit. They misunderstood the fundamental reason for the invisible buildings. It was never about size or spectacle. It was about intention and alignment. This sub-myth reinforces the idea that some mysteries are not meant to be solved by force, and some powers are not meant for mortal hands. It suggests that the most profound beauty and order can only arise from a place of reverence, not domination. The cursed earthworks of the rivals stand as permanent reminders that attempting to steal a god's eye view without the god's purpose leads only to ruin. This manipulation of perspective leads to the architect's sixth and perhaps most humbling principle, the deliberate dichotomy of scale and perception. His designs masterfully exploit the gap between what we can see and what truly is. A feature that appears utterly insignificant from our ground-level view, like a low, grassy mound no taller than a person, reveals its true purpose only from the heavens. From above, that small hill is not a random act of nature. It is the eye of a colossal animal figure, or the keystone in a vast geometric pattern spanning miles. It is a single brick in a wall so immense we cannot comprehend its totality from within. This is not an accident of design, it is the very point. The architect built a fundamental truth about the universe directly into his landscapes. He encoded the lesson that our immediate, human-scale perception is inherently limited. What seems small and unimportant to us might, in the grander scheme of things, be absolutely essential. A pebble is just a pebble until you realize it is part of a mountain. A single life, with all its daily struggles and joys, might feel isolated, yet it is an integral thread in a cosmic tapestry of unimaginable scale. This principle challenges our most basic instincts about importance. We are conditioned to believe that big things are significant and small things are not. But the invisible buildings teach the opposite. They suggest that true significance is not always proportional to physical size from our limited viewpoint. A tiny adjustment in the foundation of a building is critical to its stability, even if it is hidden from sight. In the same way, the myth implies that our individual actions, which may feel small and fleeting, could be vital components of a story whose full outline we are incapable of seeing. This is one of the myth's most profound and enduring philosophical lessons. It is an invitation, even a challenge, to adopt a more expansive perspective on our own existence. It asks us to consider that the meaning of our lives might not be fully apparent from the narrow vantage point of our own experiences, just as the true form of the architect's city is hidden from someone standing in its streets. The grander purpose of our own journey might only be visible from a higher, more comprehensive point of view. The myth does not diminish our world, it enlarges it, placing our seemingly small lives within a context of breathtaking scale and intention. A king might command a pyramid, but how do you instruct 1,000 hands to build a vision they can never see? This is the profound logistical puzzle at the heart of the legend. The architect's greatest miracle may not have been the design itself, but the method of its transmission. How does one translate a god's eye view into instructions for laborers who see only dirt and stone? The myths offer several captivating solutions, each more ingenious than the last. One persistent story describes a system of fire and smoke. The architect would ascend to the peak of the highest mountain, a vantage point that brought him a little closer to the heavens. From there, he would light a series of controlled fires. The specific sequence of smoke plumes, their colors, and their durations were not random signals. They were a sophisticated code, a language of the sky read by foremen positioned on distant hilltops. A single, long plume of white smoke might mean to begin digging a trench in a straight line toward the east. A quick burst of black smoke could signal a halt, a correction. The workers on the ground moved not by seeing the grand plan, but by faithfully responding to these celestial messengers, each action a single stitch in a tapestry whose full pattern remained a secret. Another, more mystical explanation involves a chosen few. The architect, it is said, did not work with foremen, but with seers. He would select priests with a particular spiritual sensitivity and guide them into deep trances. In this altered state, their consciousness would detach from their physical bodies and soar above the landscape, granting them a temporary spiritual bird's eye view. Upon awakening, they would recount the precise alignments they had witnessed, directing the workforce based on a memory of the divine perspective. Their authority came not from a scroll or a shouted order, but from a direct, albeit fleeting, encounter with the truth of the design. Then there is the most mathematically elegant legend. This version claims the architect used no supernatural sight at all. Instead, he possessed an advanced understanding of geometry and proportion. He would establish a central point, an axis mundi from which all measurements would radiate. Using long, calibrated ropes and complex calculations involving angles and ratios, he could plot a series of points on the ground. To the workers, these points would seem random, a collection of stakes driven into the earth with no apparent connection. But the architect knew that when these points were connected, they would create lines and curves that, when viewed from a specific altitude, would resolve into the intended image with perfect clarity. This method turns the entire construction process into a giant mathematical equation, where faith in the numbers replaced the need for visual confirmation. Each of these myths, whether mystical or mathematical, tries to solve the same fundamental problem, bridging the immense gap between a cosmic concept and its earthly execution. They all point to a system built on absolute trust. The workers did not need to understand the final form. They only needed to trust the process, whether it was signaled by smoke, revealed in a vision, or calculated by rope. This transforms the building site from a place of brute labor into a theater of faith, where every shovel of earth was an act of belief in a beauty they would never witness. Yet the ultimate purpose of these invisible structures may have been far more dynamic than a simple message. The seventh principle suggests these buildings were not just celestial maps, but functional portals. They were designed as active gateways, places where the boundary between our world and the divine realms grew thin and permeable. Imagine a vast labyrinth etched into a desert floor. From the ground, it is a confusing maze of paths, but from above, its pattern precisely mirrors a constellation known in myth as the Pathway of Souls. This was not a symbolic decoration. It was believed to be a functional map for the deceased, a guiding pattern that a soul could follow on its journey to the afterlife. The specific turns and alignments were instructions, leading directly to the stars associated with ancestral deities. The structure did not just represent a belief, it was a tool for navigating the afterlife itself. This function as a portal extended beyond the journey of the dead. The precise geometric shapes, the perfect circles and spirals, might have acted as cosmic lenses. Just as a glass lens can focus scattered rays of sunlight into a single, potent point of heat, these earthworks were thought to concentrate spiritual energy. A specific convergence of ley lines, amplified by a star-shaped design, could create a focal point where communication with the gods was possible. This was not merely a place for prayer, but a sacred switchboard, a direct line to the heavens. Some legends go even further, suggesting that under the right celestial conditions, such as a planetary alignment or a meteor shower, these portals could temporarily open, allowing for a fleeting passage between worlds. A priest might step into the center of a stone circle during a lunar eclipse and find themselves not on a windswept hill, but at the threshold of a divine realm, if only for a heartbeat. This transforms our understanding of the architect's work entirely. His creations were not passive monuments to be admired from afar by gods. They were active, working parts of the cosmos, as integral to its function as a heart is to a body. They were instruments of connection, built to maintain the delicate balance between heaven and earth, ensuring that the dialogue between mortal and divine was not just a hope, but a tangible architectural reality. But the story of the celestial architect does not end with a final, triumphant masterpiece. Just as his buildings fade from view, so too does the architect himself. The legends tell us that once his great work was complete, he simply vanished. In one version, he was gathered up by the very deities he honored, ascending on a beam of sunlight to take his place among the stars. A more mysterious tale claims he did not leave at all, but instead walked into the center of one of his own invisible structures, crossing a threshold that closed behind him, becoming a permanent part of the hidden world he had designed. His disappearance was as enigmatic as his creations, a final act that perfectly mirrored their elusive nature. This vanishing act was not an ending, but the beginning of his true legacy. By removing himself from the story, the architect transformed the entire world into an unsolved mystery. His absence is an invitation. It suggests that his creations are not relics of a forgotten past, but dormant artifacts waiting. The myths imply these invisible buildings are still there, woven into the very fabric of our hills and fields, their celestial patterns intact. They are waiting for humanity to reach a new stage of understanding, to develop a perception that can finally see what has been there all along. This is what makes the myth so enduringly powerful. It is not a closed book, but an open question left for the future. It challenges us to grow. For centuries, the only way to perceive such a design was through spiritual insight or divine revelation. But today, we have new tools. Our technology, our satellites and aerial drones grant us a perspective that would have seemed godlike to the ancients. We can now scan the Earth from the heavens, mapping every contour with laser precision. In a very real sense, we are developing the very eyes the myth said we would need. Every time archaeologists use satellite imagery to discover a new geoglyph or a previously unknown alignment of ancient stones, we are, in a small way, fulfilling the prophecy of the legend. We are learning to see the invisible. The architect's legacy, then, is not just a collection of stories. It is a permanent spark of wonder, a suggestion that the world is more than it appears. It tells us that the greatest mysteries are not necessarily hidden in dark tombs or lost cities, but might be lying in plain sight, disguised as the ordinary landscape around us. The myth endures because it offers a thrilling possibility. What if we are not the first to try and map the cosmos onto the Earth? What if the puzzle was set for us millennia ago, and we are only now acquiring the means to solve it? The celestial architect may be gone, but his challenge remains, whispering from the stones and the soil, urging us to look up and to look closer. The legend of the architect is no longer confined to ancient whispers. Our modern world has given it a new kind of breath, a technological resurrection. With the launch of satellites into the silent black above, we have been granted a vantage point that was once the exclusive domain of deities. Archaeologists now routinely scan the Earth from orbit, their eyes replaced by sensors that can see beyond the visible spectrum, and what they are finding is staggering. Vast geometric patterns, colossal animal figures, and complex networks of lines, all etched into the earth, have been emerging from obscurity. These are not just new discoveries, they are revelations. For centuries, even millennia, these designs lay hidden in plain sight, disguised as natural contours of the land, visible only to the birds and the clouds. Now, with a click of a mouse, we can zoom in from a height of hundreds of miles and see a perfect spiral in the Kazakh steppe or a massive trapezoid in the Arabian desert that no one standing below could ever have comprehended. This is not merely convenient, it is profoundly symbolic, the very premise of the myth that the grandest designs are invisible from the ground is being validated by science. Each new geoglyph discovered from space feels like a page being turned in the architect's lost portfolio. It forces a fascinating question: are we, with our satellites, simply uncovering forgotten history? Or are we finally developing the perceptual tools to see a world that was intentionally designed to be hidden from us? The myth transforms in this new light. It ceases to be a pure fantasy and becomes a powerful metaphor for our own technological journey. We are, in a very real sense, learning to see like gods. We are peering down at our own planet and reading a text that was written in the language of the land itself, a text whose authors understood that its true meaning would only be unlocked by a viewer from the heavens. This shifts the architect from a mystical figure of the past to a prophetic archetype for our future. His story is no longer about what was lost, but about what we are on the verge of finding. The invisible world he supposedly built is now becoming visible, piece by piece, pixel by pixel, challenging us to reconsider not just our past, but the very nature of perception and the hidden stories sleeping beneath our feet. This deliberate separation from any human audience forces a radical rethinking of value itself. The architect's entire life's work, by its very nature, would be a magnificent failure if judged by our conventional standards. We measure the worth of a painting by the crowds it draws, a building by the people who inhabit it, a song by the number of ears that hear it. Our world operates on a simple economy of attention. But the myth presents a powerful alternative, an eighth principle that asks a profound ethical question. What is the true value of a masterpiece created in secret for an audience that may or may not be watching? The architect's answer is not one of doubt but of absolute conviction. The value lies not in human admiration, but in the sacred act of creation aligned with a cosmic order. It is a value defined by purpose and connection, not by applause. This directly challenges our deeply ingrained anthropocentrism, the belief that humanity is the central focus of existence. The myth suggests the universe does not revolve around our gaze. A forest does not lose its majesty if no one walks through it. A star does not cease to burn brightly simply because there is no one to look up and see it. In the same way, the invisible building possesses immense intrinsic value simply because it exists in perfect harmony with the heavens. It fulfills its purpose by being a correct and beautiful part of the cosmic machine, regardless of whether a single mortal ever comprehends its form. This idea extends far beyond architecture into the very way we live our lives. How many acts of quiet kindness, of personal integrity, or of steadfast dedication are performed with no audience at all? A parent's sacrifice, an artist's private practice, a scientist's years of isolated research, these are all invisible monuments. Their worth is not diminished because they are not trending on social media or celebrated in public squares. Their value is inherent in the action itself, in its alignment with a personal or higher purpose. The myth of the celestial architect, therefore, becomes a lesson in humility and intention. It invites us to consider the purity of creating something for the sake of the act itself, for the simple reason that it is true and good and aligned with a greater design. It asks us to build our own invisible monuments, not of earth and stone, but of character and action, whose value is written not in the ledger of public opinion, but in the silent geometry of a meaningful life. This deep-seated yearning for a higher view is written into our very psychology. We spend our lives at ground level, surrounded by the immediate and the urgent, the tangled undergrowth of daily existence. It is a perspective defined by obstacles and limited horizons, where we can see the tree directly in front of us, but never the entire forest. The myth of the invisible buildings gives a powerful shape to our innate frustration with this limitation. It voices a quiet, persistent suspicion that the world is not as chaotic as it appears from our narrow vantage point. We sense there is a pattern, a grand design, a reason behind the seemingly random events that shape our days. The celestial architect's creations are the ultimate expression of this belief. They are a promise that the chaos is an illusion and that a breathtaking order lies just beyond our normal sight, waiting to be discovered. This is why the legend resonates so powerfully across centuries. It is not really about architecture, but about a fundamental human quest for meaning. When we feel lost in the complexity of our own lives, grappling with decisions whose consequences we cannot fully foresee, the idea of a God's eye view becomes profoundly comforting. It suggests that our struggles, our joys, and our sorrows are not just isolated incidents. They might be essential components of a larger, more beautiful narrative, one whose full arc we are simply too close to see. The invisible building is a metaphor for the hidden logic of our own existence. We are like the laborers who moved the stones, faithfully following instructions we do not fully understand, trusting that our small contributions are part of a magnificent whole. This psychological drive manifests in countless ways. It is the scientist searching for a unifying theory to explain the cosmos, the detective piecing together clues to reveal the truth, the historian connecting disparate events into a coherent story. Every time we create a map, a chart, or a diagram, we are attempting to impose order on chaos, to step back and see the bigger picture. We are trying, in our own small way, to become the architect for our own world. The myth inspires this very impulse. It tells us that the higher perspective is not a fantasy but an achievement. It can be reached through the accumulation of knowledge, which allows us to see the patterns in history and nature. It can be found through spiritual practice, which seeks to align the individual soul with a cosmic order, or it can be cultivated through quiet introspection, the slow and patient work of understanding how our own personal story fits into a larger tapestry. Ultimately, the legend endures because it validates our deepest intuition. It confirms that our longing to see beyond the horizon is not a sign of dissatisfaction, but a sign of wisdom. It is an acknowledgement that the most important truths are often the ones that cannot be grasped from where we currently stand. The invisible buildings challenge us to keep looking up, to keep seeking a wider view, and to trust that there is more to reality than what immediately meets the eye. This final evolution of the legend suggests the architect's greatest creations were never truly finished. The most profound interpretations of the myth propose that these invisible structures are not inert monuments frozen in time, but living, breathing entities. They possess a kind of geological life, growing and changing over millennia in a slow, deliberate dance with the planet itself. The straight line of a trench, perfect when first dug, might gradually curve over centuries as tectonic plates shift beneath it, the Earth's restless crust adding its own signature to the design. A spiral mound might be subtly reshaped by the persistent, patient work of wind and rain, not as erosion, but as a form of natural collaboration. This living quality extends to the very flora and fauna that inhabit these sites. Certain myths tell of grasses that grow a specific shade of green only along the outlines of the hidden glyphs, or of burrowing animals that instinctively avoid disturbing the sacred patterns, their tunnels tracing the edges as if guided by an unseen force. In this view, the entire ecosystem becomes a custodian of the artwork, a symbiotic relationship where the land and its inhabitants work together to maintain a design meant for the sky. This idea resonates deeply with ancient animistic beliefs, the understanding that spirit exists not just in people and animals, but in stones, rivers, and mountains. The architect, then, was not a cold engineer imposing geometry upon a passive world. He was a midwife to the landscape, a facilitator who awakened a latent potential for order and meaning within the earth itself. He did not simply build on the land, he gave birth to new landscapes, imbuing them with a life and purpose that continues to evolve long after his departure. The structure is not a thing he left behind, but a being he ushered into existence. This transforms our entire relationship with these places. We are not walking among ruins, but through a living body, a testament to art that is still breathing, still becoming. It suggests that the truest masterpieces are not those that resist change, but those that embrace it, weaving the passage of eons into their very fabric and making the earth itself a permanent, dynamic participant in the celestial conversation. The ghost of the celestial architect walks among us, not in ancient ruins, but in the galleries and open fields of contemporary art. In the 1960s, a movement known as land art emerged, where creators like Robert Smithson deliberately turned away from traditional canvases to use the earth itself as their medium. His most famous work, The Spiral Jetty, is a 1,500-foot-long coil of black basalt rocks extending into the Great Salt Lake in Utah. To stand on its winding path is to experience a stark and beautiful isolation, but it is an experience of a single, curving line. The full, majestic form of the spiral, its perfect geometry echoing ancient shell fossils and distant galaxies, reveals itself only from the air. Smithson was not building for gods, but he was consciously working in the same tradition, creating art that challenged the very nature of viewership. He forced a confrontation with scale, making the viewer acutely aware of their own physical smallness and the limitations of their perspective. This is the modern echo of the ancient myth, a deliberate act of creation that remains partially hidden, demanding a shift in vantage point to be fully understood. This architectural archetype fuels our science fiction, giving us stories of alien engineers whose works are so vast they can only be perceived from space. The idea of a Dyson sphere, a hypothetical megastructure built around an entire star to harness its energy, is a direct descendant of the celestial architect's philosophy. It is a creation of unimaginable scale, built by an intelligence whose perception and purpose operate on a cosmic level, far beyond human comprehension. In these narratives, humanity often stumbles upon these artifacts, much like we discover new geoglyphs with satellites, and the central drama becomes one of interpretation. Can we, with our limited minds, understand the intentions of a builder who thinks in terms of solar systems and millennia? This is the ultimate extension of the myth, pushing the question of perception to its logical extreme. It explores the terrifying and thrilling possibility that our entire world, our solar system, even the laws of physics themselves, could be part of an intricate design whose architect we can never meet and whose blueprint we can barely read. Why does this 5,000-year-old idea continue to resonate so powerfully? It endures because it provides a perfect template for exploring the most pressing questions of our time. In an age of virtual reality and artificial intelligence, where our perception of what is real is constantly being challenged, the myth of the invisible building offers a powerful metaphor. It speaks to the suspicion that our everyday reality is merely a surface layer, that there are deeper codes and patterns hidden beneath the skin of the world, waiting for the right key to be revealed. Contemporary artists and writers use this archetype to investigate themes of data, privacy, and the unseen systems that govern our lives. The Internet, for instance, is a vast, invisible architecture of information, a digital landscape whose true shape and influence are impossible to grasp from our individual vantage points within it. We are all like the ancient laborers, moving data according to algorithms we do not fully see, contributing to a global structure whose ultimate form remains a mystery. This proves that the most potent myths are never truly finished. They are not static stories locked in the past, but living frameworks that adapt to each new generation's anxieties and technologies. The celestial architect is no longer a figure of forgotten legend, but a creative partner for those who seek to question, to wonder, and to look beyond the obvious. He represents the enduring human drive to create meaning on a grand scale, to leave a mark that transcends the individual and speaks to a cosmos we are only beginning to understand. The myth persists because it is ultimately a story about the future, a challenge to keep searching for the higher perspective, to keep trying to see the invisible designs that might be shaping our world right now. The celestial architect's genius did not lie in one single skill, but in the seamless weaving of three distinct threads into a single, unbreakable cord. He was not an artist who dabbled in science or a priest who commissioned buildings. In his world, the roles of artist, scientist, and mystic were not separate professions, but different facets of a single, unified consciousness. The vision of a sprawling animal glyph required an artist's eye for form and beauty. The precise execution of that glyph over miles of terrain demanded a scientist's grasp of geometry, astronomy, and engineering. And the profound reason for its creation, to communicate with the divine, sprang from a spiritual understanding of humanity's place in the cosmos. These were not sequential steps, but simultaneous, interdependent acts. The beauty of the design was inseparable from its astronomical accuracy, and both were meaningless without the sacred intention that gave them purpose. This holistic approach presents a quiet challenge to our modern world, where knowledge is so often divided into separate, specialized silos. We have brilliant astrophysicists who map the stars but may never set foot in an art gallery. We have visionary painters who may feel disconnected from the spiritual or the scientific. The myth suggests that this fragmentation comes at a cost. It implies that our deepest understanding of the universe cannot be found through intellect alone, or through faith alone, or through artistic expression alone. True insight emerges when these ways of knowing converge, when we engage with reality not just as a puzzle to be solved, but as a mystery to be experienced with our whole being. The architect's invisible buildings stand as a testament to what is possible when we stop seeing the world through separate lenses and begin to perceive it as an integrated whole, where every equation has a certain elegance and every prayer contains a hidden geometry. This distinction between symbolic truth and literal history is absolutely vital. The enduring appeal of the celestial architect does not depend on us believing he possessed alien technology or supernatural powers. In fact, insisting on a literal interpretation can ironically strip the myth of its deepest power. When we try to force these stories into a framework of factual history, we often miss their real point. The myth is not a puzzle to be solved with claims of lost ancient lasers or extraterrestrial blueprints. It is a mirror held up to humanity itself, reflecting our timeless capacity for wonder, our relentless drive to create meaning, and our profound connection to the cosmos. The real magic is not in how the buildings were made, but in why the idea of them has captivated us for millennia. This story endures because it speaks to something fundamental within the human spirit, not because it provides evidence for fringe theories. By appreciating it as a profound cultural narrative, we free it to do what myths do best, which is to explore the big questions about who we are and our place in the universe. We can then see the Nazca lines not as potential alien landing strips, but as breathtaking testaments to human ingenuity and spiritual devotion. We can admire the precise solar alignments of ancient temples not as proof of advanced physics, but as expressions of a deep desire to harmonize human life with the grand cycles of nature. This shift in perspective does not diminish these wonders, it humanizes them. It makes them more accessible, more relatable, and in many ways more impressive. The true marvel is that people, using their own intelligence, observation, and sheer determination, could conceive of and execute such magnificent works. To attribute their achievements to outside forces is to rob our ancestors of their own genius. The myth of the celestial architect is a celebration of that very human genius, a story that empowers us by showing what we are capable of when we reach for the stars with nothing but our own hands and our own imagination. It challenges us to find the architect within ourselves, to look at the world with fresh eyes, and to consider what invisible monuments we might build with our own lives. The greatest secret of the celestial architect was never hidden in the landscape at all. In the most profound versions of the myth, the sprawling geoglyphs and celestial alignments were merely the first lesson, a kind of spiritual primer. Their true purpose was to train our perception, to teach us how to see a hidden order so that we might eventually turn that skill inward. The vast, invisible buildings were a mirror, and the reflection they were meant to reveal was the architecture of the human soul itself. This is the ultimate twist, the final secret that brings the entire epic journey home. We have been searching the continents for a masterpiece, when all along we were the living, breathing monuments designed to be seen from a higher vantage point. This internal architecture shares the same elusive qualities as the external ones. From our own limited, ground-level perspective of daily thought and emotion, our inner world can seem chaotic, a jumble of conflicting impulses and fleeting feelings. We experience ourselves as a series of disconnected events, much like a person standing inside a giant glyph sees only a single, meaningless trench. We cannot perceive the grand design of our own character. But the myth suggests that just as there is a perfect pattern to a Nazca line visible only from the air, there is a coherent, beautiful structure to our consciousness that becomes clear only from a higher state of awareness. The patience we practice in a moment of frustration is not an isolated act, but a single, carefully placed stone in a vast mosaic of compassion. A moment of integrity under pressure is not just a good choice, but a critical alignment in the spiritual foundation of who we are. From the perspective of our everyday worries, these acts might seem small and insignificant, but from the elevated view of reflection and wisdom, they connect into the outlines of a majestic and unique being. The architect's principles suddenly apply to our own lives with startling clarity. The principle of temporal revelation, where a building only appears at a specific celestial moment, finds its echo in our own experience. There are times in our lives, often during moments of quiet contemplation, profound loss, or unexpected joy, when the fog of our daily concerns parts. For a fleeting instant, we gain a glimpse of our own grand design. We see how our past struggles were not random punishments, but necessary shaping forces. We understand how our talents and weaknesses fit together into a coherent whole. We perceive the narrative of our life not as a series of accidents, but as an intentional story whose pattern we had been too close to see. These moments are like the solstice sunrise illuminating the hidden city, offering a brief, breathtaking vision of the masterpiece we are in the process of becoming. This transforms the entire purpose of the ancient legend. It ceases to be a story about finding something outside of ourselves and becomes a guide for an inner journey. The challenge is no longer to locate a forgotten earthwork, but to cultivate the consciousness required to perceive the hidden architecture within. Practices like meditation, introspection, and mindful living are not about escaping the world, but about ascending to that higher vantage point. They are the equivalent of the architect's mythical eagle, granting us the perspective to see the whole picture. When we learn to observe our thoughts and emotions without being consumed by them, we are, in effect, learning to fly above the landscape of our own mind. From there, the chaos resolves into meaning. The winding path of our life's journey reveals its direction. The final secret is that the celestial architect's blueprint was not for a temple of stone, but for a temple of spirit, and the building materials are the choices we make every single day. We are the invisible building, and the ultimate act of devotion is to wake up to the breathtaking design of our own existence. The legend of the celestial architect is ultimately a story about how we see and what we choose to value. It asks us to consider the possibility that the most significant aspects of our existence are not the loudest or the most obvious, but the quiet, enduring patterns that reveal themselves only when we shift our gaze. This myth is not an artifact locked in the past, but a living framework for understanding our present. With our satellites and digital maps, we have achieved the very perspective the stories said was reserved for the divine. Every time we zoom out from a street view to a continent-spanning image, we are performing a modern version of the ancient ritual, searching for the grand design in the details. This technological ability mirrors a deeper, more personal challenge. The true invitation of the legend is to apply that same elevated perspective to the landscape of our own lives. Our daily routines can feel like a series of disconnected trenches, much like the individual lines of a geoglyph. The frustrations, the small victories, the seemingly random encounters, all can appear chaotic from our ground-level view. But what if we could rise above that, even for a moment? What hidden pattern might emerge? Perhaps the years you spent in a difficult job were not wasted time, but essential curves in a larger spiral of resilience. A chance meeting that changed your path might be the precise alignment that gives meaning to the entire composition. The masterpiece is not out there, waiting to be found on a remote plateau. It is being built every day through our actions, our choices, and our character. The challenge is to trust that there is a design, even when we can only see a single stone. The story of the celestial architect endures because it validates a profound human hope that our lives are part of something vast and beautifully ordered. It encourages us to be both the architect and the observer of our own existence, to build with intention and to periodically seek the higher view. What hidden patterns have you begun to notice when you look at your world from a new angle?